Okay, I'm on. Well, thank you all for coming. It's nice of you. This particular topic that I picked out for tonight, I was back and forth about it. I didn't know if it became theoretical, but I found out in my own life it's important, at least to get across the basic message, and that was the title I chose was Finding God in Human Experience. When I first got ordained, I had 4 years of theology. I had it pumped into my head, I had answers, and I had stuff from the Bible and dogmas and teachings, and I was kind of going around a lot looking where I could plug this in, I didn't get a very good response, and I kind of wondered why. And I figured it out that there is nothing more irrelevant than an answer given to a question that wasn't asked. And by the grace of God and all that, I realized I was starting way too far in advance. And looking for God, I would get to Scripture, church teachings, and all that stuff. But the starting place was a whole lot prior to that stuff. And what I found out is that when we ask questions about life, big questions, some of the deep questions of life, we go through experiences, we find out that a lot of these questions and experiences are shared by all sorts of people, even though we don't talk about it a whole lot. And these become very inescapably human questions. And I think what we engage in here, there's a dialogue at times between questions from the secular world, questions from the religious world. But what I want to do tonight when I start, I don't want to start with religious questions or specifically religious insights. I want to ask questions that everybody asks, whether they're secular, whether they're religious, whether they're atheists, or whether they're believers. Because everybody asks these deep kinds of questions. So I'm not beginning with explicit religion, but I think it's important when we ask all these kinds of questions, because some of them about life lead us to a realm of life that some people call it's beyond the everyday, beyond the ordinary. And they can call it maybe transcendence, that we go beyond our ordinary kind of self. Some people don't call it transcendence. Some people call it depth experiences, that we go deeper into ourselves and try to find out what is the basis of our humanity. So it's really important that we look at these kind of questions, and here's the issue. And I'm going to try to give some examples of these questions and experiences. But a lot of people will say at times, I had an experience and it pushed me to my limits, something extremely human, a level of transcendence. The question is going to be, if there is this level of transcendence or depth in life, let's say transcendence, does there have to be something that supports what that transcendent part of life is? A religious answer to this would be, there has to be a transcendent one or someone who grounds that or gives it to us and makes it even work with us. I came across Professor Langdon Gilkey, who taught at Chicago for years, and he said, when I looked at some of the deep questions in my life, what I was about, who I was, where I come from, what my values are, he said, I just tried to explain them by psychology, sociology, sometimes economics. But he said, what happened to me is the deeper I got, the less satisfactory those answers were. And almost in spite of myself, I started to get into philosophical and theological language because it was only that could explain what was inside of me. So I'm using spatial language, transcendence. It sounds like, way up there. Or some people just call them depth experiences. It's deep inside of us. I just want to give you a working definition of this, of what these common human experiences are. And it is the quality of life that leads us to the depth of our humanity. So we're dealing with important issues that get us deep down inside. It is the surpassing elements in people. So there seem to be some elements where we get beyond just ordinary things in the day. And this surpassing element leads us beyond the merely material towards ultimate questions and possible answers. So that's what we look for at times is there something built into us that moves us to areas that are beyond? And is there something in us that is human that already connects us with God? Now, I just want to mention what kind of questions and what kind of experiences would we talk about with these depth experiences? Well, for example, we all know that temporality is going to get us. We're all going to die. So we live our life knowing that we don't control our whole lives ultimately. And we wonder, what do we do with the existence that we have? We know at times we're very finite. We can't control what life is about at times. Situations hit us. We'd like to be stronger, but we're not. When you think about what are your values, what are the most important things in your life, this moves us to who we are as human beings. Some of the examples that people ask of this, one I just want to see, some of you may remember this. It won't give away your age right away, but do some of you remember a show, a TV show back in the 1950s, and the star of the show was Bishop Fulton J. Sheen? You remember him? He was so good, he was so popular, even Milton Berle took second place to him, and he had such a following, and Bishop Sheen and his lectures. Do you remember the title of that show, Bishop Sheen's show? It was called Life is Worth Living. That was the name of it. And one of the issues that Sheen kept bringing up is, if you say that life is worth living, you've already made an act of faith in life. Because there's some people that don't believe there's any purpose, and they live in almost a nihilistic kind of an attitude. But if you say, at least I believe in life, that's already moving you into the realm of faith. Peter Berger, the sociologist, used this example one time. During the Nazi occupation of, I think it was in Poland, some of the Jews were rounded up, and of course many of them were just massacred and killed. And he says there was one example. There were about 10 Jewish men who were all going to be brought up and going to be hung. And a couple of them in the line were kidding around. And one guy says to the other, "Man, that short, fat neck of yours, that's certainly going to be stretched, and they're making jokes about, you're so heavy, you're going to break the rope." And Berger looks at this and says, is this just dark humor, black humor? Or was it an implicit act of faith on the part of these guys who were facing death to say, no matter what's happening to us, you can't rob us of our humanity, and we think possibly there is something more that awaits us even in eternal life. So in looking at what life was about and even making jokes about it, was it an implicit act of faith to say, I think there's something more or greater in this? Andrew Greeley, the sociologist, says, people have told him, when married couples are together, sometimes the intimacy of sexual union is so profound, it is so deep, that they come into an awareness of love that they say is just surpassing, and it's almost, they go, hopefully, in what some call ecstasy, and they move into a category that they feel, I'm beyond just the ordinary things, and I know to a great extent what love is. Uses another example in sexuality. Some of you will know this. Almost every woman who has been childbearing, has children, will say, at that moment when the newborn baby was put into the arms of the mother, that was such a momentous moment, such a surpassing moment, that a lot of mothers don't even have the words for it. They just know that it was, it's ecstasy, it was beyond themselves. I had one woman who said, it was a major time in my life when I knew what my sexuality was about, and I knew what I was as a life giver, and I knew what the connectedness was of myself and others. And this one gal said to me, holding that baby in my arms was more of an argument for God than all your theology books and all your reasoning and whatever your dogmas are about. I will bet you, if I asked for a show of hands, that any of the mothers here know what that woman was talking about. Yeah, I would think so. One woman told me at a time, she said, I have had 3 surpassing moments in my life that have brought me close to God. She said it was each time they put that newborn baby in my arms, and I really knew who I was at the depth of my humanity. And that gave me an indication of something so beyond me that the only explanation I could come up with was God. And that's the kind of stuff that these authors talk about in trying to find God in human experiences. Other people, this is a very common one also, other people will just say, some experience of beauty in life. We've all done this, been to the top of the mountain, watched the sunset, and people just feel a sense of their own smallness compared to what nature is, but they feel a sense of connectedness with what nature is about. Thoreau and the boys all went through this. It's nature mystic experience, and some people just say they are so moved that they almost go somewhere else. It's hard to explain how deeply they've been moved by something simple like beauty. They tell the story of Michelangelo when he created the great statue of Moses. You ever see the one? It's Moses is seated in his chair and he got a big beard. It's a great big thing. And it was so lifelike. This is probably a legend that Michelangelo took out his rubber mallet and went up to it and he banged it on the knee and said, "Speak!" And it was the movement of what he had created so got to him that it just incorporated itself into who he was. This experience, St. Thomas Aquinas uses this. He says, everybody gets an intellect. Well, most people get an intellect. But the intellect, and what is the role of the intellect as we think and reason? We're all searching for a truth. But what happens when you discover a truth? You always know there's a bigger truth, or there's more, or you can elaborate on it. So Thomas was saying the nature of the mind is restless because it never says this is enough. You can always figure out more and more and more. So St. Thomas asks the question, what would satisfy the intellect that God has given us? He says it would only be when you came to a truth that is so profound, so great, if you called it an infinite truth, then the mind could rest and said, okay, I've found the ultimate thing that I've been looking for. But Thomas says, but what is infinite truth? He says, infinite truth is God. So his argument was, everybody in their intellectual activities is searching for this truth, and the only thing that would ultimately satisfy it is finally when we came to the complete truth, and that is God. So Thomas was arguing that God has inbuilt into our intellect experiences of searching that will only be complete when we come to God. He does the same thing with the human will. What is the role of the human will? It is especially to either seek the good or seek love. Everybody knows in love what a power it is, but we always know there's more to love. We can give more love. We can expand our love. So St. Thomas's argument was, what would satisfy the human will so that it could say, I've come to an ultimate part of life. I don't need to search anymore. I have come into possession of ultimate love. Thomas says, but what is ultimate love? It is God who is ultimate love. So St. Thomas was arguing that it's almost as though God has put a homing device in us. And what he's doing is creating us in a certain way that we are necessarily going to be seeking for this more or this beyond or this greatness in a way that ultimately would lead to God, even if it's a subtle way. Now, not everybody would accept this kind of an argument. It just depends what conclusion you want to make. But Thomas was making an argument, not a proof, an argument to try to say, if you think that way, what would finally satiate your desire for truth or for love? It can only be when you come to the fullness of that truth or love. And he says, that's God. God made us for God's very self. I used to pull this sometimes on, I was teaching once and I had a group of undergraduates. Here's a bunch of students, 18 to 21, something. And I would ask them, I want you to think about any kind of an experience that you've had or what you're searching with or struggling with in life, something that has happened to you, and I want to know how you explained it. So I said, I don't want you talking off the top of your head. Next class you got to come in, I want you to write this out. And what I did is, actually I gave them 2 classes, and they handed in the papers, and I got to read them first. And then we came into class, and I was going to ask them, young people, what are your experiences, and have you come to anything like that? Well, nobody wants to talk about that, and all the students were thinking, he's going to think I'm goofy, if I tell him, something that happened, so nobody wants to talk up. So I told them all, if you don't want to talk when I call on you, just say, I pass. You don't have to really talk. You'll fail the course, but that's your problem. Well, it was interesting. Nobody wanted to talk up after a while. Come on, folks. We're all friends here. Finally, one young man talked up, and he did talk about experiences of beauty that he had gotten in his life, experiences of nature that had just moved him, he said, to just this level that he didn't quite know how to explain. So he went on with this. And finally I said to the class, how many of you know what he's talking about and have gone through something like that? More than half the class. Oh, raise their hand. And I'll say, we know what he's doing. Yeah, we went through the thing. And I said, nobody wanted to talk about it, but I said, you see, these are common human experiences. People get these kind of things. I was looking at the statistics that Andrew Greeley had years ago. He said 50% of a sample of young Americans have experienced being in touch with the sacred. 50% experience that there is an order and a purpose in their lives. Combine ecstatic, sacred, and purpose experiences, and more than 70% of young adults have had at least one of those experiences. Abraham Maslow, he was an eminent psychologist, and he talked about peak experiences, when you go to some level that you just peak out. You're at the highest part of your game, you know. The thrill of victory, the agony of defeat, all that. He said in his research, virtually every young people with whom he had worked had some kind of an experience like that. These are just young people, not yet lots of experience in life. Others started talking up and they started saying, a friend of mine, 17 years old, died in a car crash. I don't know what to do. I didn't know how to handle death and all. Another kid, he brought it up. He said, I broke up with my girlfriend. I was so bad, I was almost suicidal. He said, I don't know why. I went home and I stretched out on the bed. And the pillow was up there. I was upside down in the bed. And he said, for some reason, I turned on the radio. And he said, there was music on. And he said, I hardly recognized it. But all of a sudden, the music got into me. And he said, it wasn't that I was listening to the music. It was as though it was inside of me. And somehow it brought me a level of peace that I just knew that I could continue to go on and life would still have meaning. And the interesting part about this is, when I had their papers ahead of me, I was looking for certain things in it, and I used a yellow highlighter, and I was highlighting. And I just showed them very quickly. Look at this one. You all had this. 80% of them, I used the yellow highlighter. And what I was looking for is what I think you could call mystery language. They're all saying things like, before you think I'm crazy when I talk about this experience, or I don't know how to put this in words, but listen to me. Words fail me at this point, and I don't know how to explain it better. They would say, something happened that was so beyond me that I didn't know where I was. And I just went, and I didn't tell them about that language. I just let it, and I knew it would come out. And what it shows is there are some experiences in life that are so deep, so profound, we almost don't know how to articulate it. And that's why lots of people who have had pretty deep experiences don't talk about it. You're going to think I'm weird, or it was so deep in me that oh, you won't believe me, leave it alone like that. And they go through this. But I think the mystery language after a while starts to show us that these deep kinds of levels are common, they're human, they're profound, and they move us in a direction that says, well, what is the answer? Why did you have this? Now, some of the students that I had, they said, I don't know how to explain it. I don't know what it was, and they left it alone. But others said, this moved me in a direction where I think I have to examine whether or not God is in my life, or God was behind that experience, or I can only explain it to something like a God. That if there is this transcending experience, there must be a transcendent one or something that makes it all possible. Now, when I'm talking about this, what I just like to say, what this means is, when you live your life, God is already present to human life. You would think it's not just Bible yet, it's not just dogmas. It's God is already present, calling people by the way God made us when we reflect on these kinds of deep experiences. I think to some degree, since almost everybody goes through this, it's an inescapable part of life, and it's an initial awareness of the more, the greater, something that's beyond just food, shelter, and survival. And I think another important part of this is it shows that God is not out there, up in some heaven that we can't find. I think more and more we realize God is here in us, in the life. That's where we find, in life, in the togetherness with others, and everything that creates what we think humanity should be about. Gottfried Diekmann was an eminent liturgist and also studied the Greek fathers of the church. And in his 90s, he was a Benedictine monk, and in his 90s, he was asked, Godfrey, if you had it to do all over again, like knowing what you know now, Godfrey, what would you really emphasize? What would you tell people about? And he said, divinization. I would try to convince people that God touches life and that God is within us. And it's not just the God out there, it's the God within us. The God who sent Jesus Christ in the incarnation and has changed humanity is the God that is with us. And he said that would be the message I would continue to try to reveal to people. And I think this is where we get a split in some of the different Christian traditions. But I think when I talk about this stuff about transcending experiences and all, there's some people that just say, well, that's just a human experience. It's just, your endorphins are working or something. It's just a human experience. But I think you can argue, maybe it's just from the religious viewpoint, that grace, God's loving touch, is already in us from the beginning. It's not that we merited it and went out and got it. It's that God gives it to us. It's a beginning grace. It's an initial grace. And here's the thing about this. If it is God who is doing all this stuff in our life and making us reflect and think of these other kinds of great experiences, is that already revelation? Is that already God's revealing his inner life to us? Some people think that revelation, God's revealing, God's manifesting himself to us, can only be found in the Bible. It's only when you get to real religion that's revelation. I think that's deficient. I think when we talk about God revealing to us, God does it early, and he does it to everybody. Now, if God is doing it to everybody, calling us out with these possibilities of life, everybody, then maybe everybody has the possibility of being saved by this loving God. There's loads of people, this is where the split takes place. Some people would say what I've been talking about thus far tonight is philosophy. And philosophy doesn't save because the only thing that can save is God in Jesus Christ. This possibility says, maybe good Hindus and good Buddhists already are being called into the possibilities of salvation. And if they follow their intellect and they follow their conscience and live the good life, that even the God of Christianity could accept these people. What is it? Sometimes you know that even atheists are more moral than some of the religious people. And you wonder, in judgments that are made, does God just judge who people are, or does he judge them by the religion they belong to? Scripture says God desires that all be saved and come to the knowledge of the truth. Well, if God desires that all people want to be saved, God ought to at least offer some possibility that it can take place. We hope for it. I've already been condemned to hell, so it doesn't really matter. I have. And I've been told to my face that I'm not going to heaven because I'm a Catholic. And that's the wrong kind of Christian. And further than that, I have never gone up to the front and made my altar pledge in front of everybody else. Well, I'm pretty evident on Sundays up there. I'm kind of making my altar pledge, but they will tell you I can't be saved. And when I talked to one of these people who was a missionary in India. Years. He was there 8 years. He lived with neighbors and all this stuff. And I said, did you ever talk to these people about, you're trying to convert them to Christianity and all that? Yeah. He said, I had to tell them, they're damned to hell. They can't be saved because they don't believe on the Lord Jesus and they got this other kind of thing. I said, you actually told your neighbors that? I thought you should keep it to yourself. But when you think about that, this is called an initial grace. It's a primordial grace. It's the beginning. But you think about this. God is present to life. God made us for himself and herself. Grace is present. God is calling us. Revelation is given to all. There's a possibility for life for everybody. Oh, it makes quite a difference to what we think about humanity and people's salvation. Now, having said all of that, okay, some Christians say, what about the Bible? What about church? What about Revelation and explicit and all that? Well, I tell them I take a long time getting to it, okay, but I do get to it. And I think what happens is when we already have this kind of a quiet, subtle, implicit religion in us, then when we come to something like a Bible, the Bible can take that and improve on it, it can purify it, it can multiply it, it can explain it in a better way. Example, we don't know what love is just because we found it in a Bible. We all found out what love was when we sat on our mother's knee, and we know what love is even just through life. But if you went something like the Bible, would anybody come up with it on their own to say, love your enemies, do good to those who persecute you? No, that's a stretch, but it's a stretch to make love more purified. It multiplies our possibilities. Is love just for me? Or, as Jesus said to Peter, how often should I forgive? 7 times? And of course, the answer is no, Peter, 70 times, 7 times. And that's what things like Bible and church do. They take the good stuff that we found in life and they kind of move it up or enlarge it or let us live it in ways that we might not have even thought about this on our own. an example like that. Zechariah, Zacchaeus, the rich man, he climbs a tree to see Jesus, and he's considered a sinner. Jesus calls him down, invites himself to supper, by the way. Zacchaeus, I must eat at your house tonight. Well, but in Luke's gospel, Jesus went to dinner an awful lot. I think Jesus might have had a little bit of a weight problem in Luke's gospel. He's always at meals and all this. Mark's gospel, he's running around, he's moving place to place. I got a feeling Mark saw Jesus as kind of a lean, mean, running machine, kind of, real. Matthew, it's kind of Jesus sitting around being a teacher and kind of, getting calluses on his rump. And when you think about this, that's Zacchaeus. He's supposed to be a bad guy, and he says, Lord, half of all that I have, I give to the poor. And if I've defrauded anyone, I give it back 4 times over. Now, I don't know too many people that give half of what they have to other people. I've known a couple of people who've tried it, and at the end you're going to leave all of it. So, when you think about that kind of an example, it calls us to a level of generosity that probably we just wouldn't have thought of just on our own. And that's the beauty, I think, of the Bible. It's constantly taking things like courage and fidelity and loyalty and virtue and saying, if you practice it, it can help you to practice it in a more intense, a higher kind of a way. But what it is doing, it is putting together ordinary, common, human life with explicit teachings then, the Bible. There was a great Protestant theologian called Barth at one time, and you have to imagine, all the fighting that went on between Protestants and Catholics over, centuries and all this stuff. And then finally, ecumenism came, and we're talking to one another, and Barth was a very open-minded kind of a theologian and all, but he was asked one time, could you ever become a Catholic? And he said, I could only become a Catholic, I can't become a Catholic because of one word. So everybody thought, papacy, works, grace. I didn't know what it was. Barth finally said, the word is and, A-N-D. He said, the Catholic tradition is synthetic, and it's always putting things together. Faith and reason, nature and grace, this life and the next life. Synthetic. Ordinary human experiences, biblical experiences, we put them together. That's been a whole tradition that we have had of the way we look at the world and life. Barth said, no, I'm sorry. My word is alone. What alone? Bible alone, Jesus alone, faith alone. It's all nice stuff, but I think it leaves out the whole thing that I've been talking about even tonight, about just trying to say, our life is so precious and it's so filled with the possibilities of this movement towards getting us beyond ourselves, that to just say, that's philosophy, it's nice, but it's not saving. Only the Bible, only faith, only the explicit knowledge of Jesus Christ is going to be able to save you. That would mean about 4 out of 5 people in this world ain't going to make it. So I think this other way of looking at it, trying to find where God is in life and experience, makes more sense of the possibilities and the beauties of why even God decided to create humanity to begin with. If humanity was created simply that we could condemn to hell 4 out of 5 people, why would a loving God want to do that? So, this is what happens lots of times, what I was saying tonight. Some people will go through transcending depth experiences, and they'll explain it by psychology, sociology, money, whatever else. Other people are going to look at it and say, no, that doesn't go deep enough. I think we have to really get down to a transcendent one or something that makes it all real. So this approach isn't a proof, it's an argument based on our own perceptions of how we're going to interpret our lives. But this is the important part. You have to take life seriously. I was raised with pretty much of a tradition of, this is a world, it's a vale of tears, we're only here temporarily, we're made for a future life, that's really where we're going to be in heaven. There's a lot of sin in the world, there's all the weight of the world and all that. It was rather a very negative viewpoint of this kind of thing. It was sort of like we're spinning our wheels to finally die, and then we can really get to something happy. I think we have to be much more optimistic about the goodness, the profundity that Almighty God has instilled in humanity. And if we don't accept that seriously, then I think we turn our backs on what God has created. Now, always knowing where the big hand is with this, I am 2 things. If there's I try to leave a question and answer period if people want to ask some questions, and I'm open to that. Or just like my students, nobody wanted to be the first one to ask a question. You're going to think I'm stupid if I ask this question, see, and so that's okay. Or I'm always aware that the mind can only absorb what the fanny can endure. And so I'm told that there may be a storm coming this way, and it might be good to get on the road early and go home, and it would give me more time to get out and see what that little red sport car is really about. Yeah, so folks, thank you for coming, and safe home, be well, and love yourselves and your humanity. Okay, go home. Okay, then. Okay.